Hello, everybody. My name is Sophie Ziegler. I'm the events coordinator for Library Juice, and I'm so excited to welcome everybody to today's book launch for Resisting Erasure. We're very, very excited about this title. Delighted that it's out. Delighted that you can join us for this event, which is part one of two, which we'll be hearing more about. Before we get started, I'll just say a couple of things about Library Juice. We have three main arms. The first of which is Library Juice Academy, where we do professional development for all of us in the LIS field. These are online Moodle-based courses, usually about 4 weeks, some are 6 weeks. These are for all sorts of topics, everything that we didn't quite learn in library school, everything that we need to know as our jobs sort of shift beneath us, and everything we've just sort of been curious about, as well as everything that our staff might need to sort of keep up with everything that's going on. So please do take a look at all those options at libraryjuiceacademy.com. We also have Library Juice Press, which is our publishing arm and who puts out today's title. We publish books and articles, books and journals, I should say. We publish books and journals on critical angles of librarianship. We have an amazing catalog of books that have already come out. We've got great new titles coming out all the time. Library Juice Press is a imprint of Litwin Books, so be sure to take a look at everything we have going on at litwinbooks.com. And then finally, we have Library Juice Connections, which is what brings us all here today. Library Juice Connections is our attempt to create a space to bring together librarians and, again, all of us in the field to think about all the wonderful things happening, all the challenges that we're facing, and really how to build a community around these ideas so that we can all figure out how to move forward into the future with this profession. We've got a great new website at libraryjuiceconnections.org where we've got a lot of great recorded videos from events we've already done. You can see which events are coming up. And of course, this event will also take its place there. So take a look at what we have going on. If you always wanted to talk about something, but you don't hear it being talked about in the field, please do reach out because we do love to make events happen. So thank you for that. That's everything I wanted to say. I'm excited to pass it over to Mary at this point for the main show. Mary?
Okay. I'm Mary Onorato, and I'm here with my co-editor, Nora Lester Murad, as well as several of our wonderful contributors. I would very much like to thank the good folks at Library Juice Press for publishing the book and for hosting this webinar, as well as our co-sponsors, Librarians and Archivists with Palestine, the Social Responsibility Roundtable, and Just World Educational. I'm very thankful to all of them for their co-sponsorship. Before we get started, I want to mention that I'm speaking today from the ancestral lands of the Wabanaki, Pennacook, and Abenaki peoples. I have to say that every day, as I enjoy the natural beauty of this area, I give thanks for their stewardship. I recognize their continuing spiritual and physical attachment to the land, as well as the enormous hardships and injustices that they had endured during the period of white settlement. And in doing that, I am very aware of the irony that as I acknowledge an historic genocide and its lasting damage, we are here to talk about efforts to quash discussion of an ongoing genocide. And I will also mention that Nora is speaking today from Ireland, an area that has also known occupation fairly recently, and that the same regulations that were used in Ireland during the occupation of incarceration without trial, collective punishment, very brutal repression of any kind of resistance or occupation or protest. These were actually the template for Israeli policies against Palestinians in the areas that they occupy. So there's kind of a historic connection there. So in a minute, Nora and I will tell you a bit about ourselves. But first, what I want to do is just give you an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. As I said, I'm Mary Onorato. My professional background is in editing and in various aspects of library reference publishing. I worked for several years in the Middle East as an editor and translator. And I also have a very personal connection because I have a Palestinian American daughter. Let me just go through the rest of this. We'll do an overview of the book, and then we will hear from our panelists, and there will be a Q&A session.
Hello, everybody. I'm Nora Murad, one of the co-editors of this anthology. I'm an author, an educator, and an activist, and recently have become an activist around libraries, not only because of this book, but because I have the honor of having been censored with Janan Matari from the Los Angeles Public Library. And if you don't know about that, we will be posting that in the chat as time goes along. But the genesis of this book, which preceded the censorship at the library, was a series of articles that I wrote with 4 Palestinian teachers about the erasure of Palestinians in English language children's books. And they were published in various peer-reviewed journals. This one, Erasure of Palestinians in English language children's books, was in ALA's YALSA, Young Adult Library Services. Then there was another one, if you want to go to the next slide, Mary. From the same study, a guest editorial in Public Library Quarterly, Why Is It So Difficult to Find Palestinian Children's Books? Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting published a piece about the erasure starting in preschool and using this Sesame Street book as kind of an exemplar for the unfortunate tactic of erasure. And then there were 2 other articles. If you want to go to the next slide, Mary.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. The School Library Journal published this guest post, Censorship of Palestinians is so normal that even anti-racists don't see it. And then all of this, which was the negative side, the bad stuff that happens, was hopefully balanced a little bit by this article, an anti-racist, anti-colonial approach to evaluating Palestinian children's books. And this was published in Journal of Literacy Innovations. Before we move on to show you just a little bit of the content, because I think it's interesting, hopefully, to all librarians, I want to give credit to the brilliant librarian and mentor, Debbie Reese, for bringing to me and to many of us just this idea that erasure is really hard to see because it's not there. You can't see it because it's not there. And it requires a whole different engagement with communities that faced and continue to face erasure. So let me show you a couple of slides of what I found. And if you want more, you can look up these articles, which are all on my website under teaching resources at idainthemiddle.com. So here's one of what we call nuances of erasure, literally a book that just doesn't mention or show Palestinians. Takes place in Palestine. Palestine and Israel are different names for the same place. Takes place in Palestine, literally doesn't show. You can go to the next one, Mary. This is an example we saw many times. Via Dolorosa is a Palestinian area in the old city of Jerusalem. Here we have V for Via Dolorosa, and there are no Palestinians visible in this Palestinian area. Another nuance that we have seen is selectively including Palestinian history, almost in a kind of a, in a convenient way, bringing it in when it supports a particular narrative and leaving it out when it doesn't. This is something hard to see if you don't know the history. This is one of my favorites, which is representing Palestinians only as a religious, cultural, or linguistic minority of Israel, and not as a national group in their own right. And that is what's so clear in this book, Welcome to Israel with Sesame Street. With the Sesame Street endorsement, I know I, as a mother, would have assumed that this was credible and, and vetted in a way, and I'm sure that it was. But those who vetted this material failed to see through the erasure and to see how Palestinians are used to tell a particular narrative about coexistence that's very far from the actual reality. And unfortunately, sometimes there is blatant racism. This book, Sharing Our Homeland, and I'm going to read this paragraph to you, is published by Lee and Low, one of the foremost diversity publishers in the United States. It's a very old book, but it's still in their catalog last I checked. And I'm going to read you this paragraph and ask you to listen carefully. When Alia, who's Palestinian, was younger, a gunman from the West Bank broke into houses in a Jewish settlement near Mysore and killed several people. The government built a security fence around the settlement, and the people of both communities held meetings to talk about their fears. Yuval, who's Israeli, had violence come even closer. One night, a terrorist from the West Bank broke into Maor and held 2 people hostage until the police came. For a long time afterward, Yuval was afraid there would be another confrontation near his home. There's a lot in there, but I'll just point out that both these children featured in this book, Alia and Yuval, were victims of violence, both by Palestinians. The only ones who enacted violence in this paragraph are the Palestinians. There's no Israeli violence in there. So they made it like it's, both kids are experiencing similar things, but they're really not similar at all. And I consider this absolutely blatant racism. We have, as always, cultural appropriation. Here's a book called Israel ABCs, a book about the people and places of Israel. And one of them is B is for Bedouin. It looks like, oh, that's great. B is for Bedouin. They included Bedouins. They included Bedouins as part of Israel, not, again, as a community that preceded Israel by a long time and exists completely separate from Israel. Exotification. O is for outdoor markets. This is one of other examples, but there's spices, there's colors, it's very beautiful. The people shopping in this market are not Palestinian, but it's very exotic, it's very attractive. And then we have lies. You could put this under blatant racism as well. This book, again, is called Israel ABCs. G is for Gold Dome, and there is the Dome of the Rock. You would think, how wonderful. If you read the text, it's inaccurate. It is intentionally inaccurate. But beyond that, the Dome of the Rock is not in Israel. It's in East Jerusalem, which was illegally annexed by Israel, and until Trump was not recognized by any country in the world. So to include the Dome of the Rock as an icon of Israel is a narrative that plays into Israel's real takeover of the actual land of East Jerusalem. And for that reason, I think it gives kids and teachers and parents who read this book a very inaccurate story. We have tokenism. So this book, once more with chutzpah, is about a Jewish American who goes around Israel and sees lots of beautiful things. There's very small reference to Palestinians in it, and it is not followed up on. It's really just tokenism. We have normalization. This is another one that's hard to see. Adventure Girl, Dabby Digs in Israel is great because it's girls and it's STEM and it's archaeology, which is so cool. But in Israel, the archaeological ministry is actually part of the colonization of the land. So where there are Palestinians who've lived for generations in places and Israel wants to take that land away, they can claim it as an archaeological site for the government, displace the Palestinians, and then do with it what they want. So that whole context and history of the way archaeology is used in Israel is missing from here. This normalizes Israel as a kind of an advanced scientific inclusive of women type of place, and does not show the truth of what the ministry does. This one is Kumbayaism. The author of this is actually a Palestinian, and she's a friend of mine, but she knows that I that I include this under Kumbayaism. Israeli and a Palestinian girl, and first they don't like each other, but they don't really know why, and then they make friends. It's a beautifully written book. It's a nice read, but again, it plays into a narrative that is very far from the truth of what's currently happening, and as a result, erases Palestinian experience completely. And then I mentioned this before, and this is the same book we mentioned before, Framing Palestinians Only Within the Israeli Context. They're half of the Palestinian population of the world live outside of Palestine, either as refugees or in the diaspora, or as migrants. But the Palestinians are the largest and longest refugee population in the world, and you would not know that from this book. Religiousization, making, quote, the conflict one of religion. Here we have Shalom Salam. There's a Jewish woman, a Muslim woman, and they become friends, Yath and Fatima. It's not untrue. It's just incomplete. And it's intentionally telling a part of the story that conflates Palestinians with Muslims, which is a problem that we have in the media and in schools, and we don't need books to further that misunderstanding. Obviously, Palestinians are not only Muslim. In fact, in the United States, most Palestinians are Christian. At least I think they recently were. So that is important for people to understand that within the erasure of Palestinians, you have the erasure of Palestinian Christians. And then conflation of Judaism with Zionism. This is one that, as a Jewish person, touches me deeply. You have books that are lovely. A Cat from Carmel Market, is about Shabbat. Nothing wrong with Shabbat. It's a beautiful story. She's going to buy the various things from, to get ready for the Sabbath dinner. Why does there have to be an Israeli flag in the market? Why? To me, that is intentional politicization. It's conflating Judaism with Zionism in a way that ultimately not only erases Palestinians, but it erases Jews who are not Zionist and makes all Jews one thing. And I turn it back over to you, Mary. I invite you all to look at not only my articles, but look at your look at the books with those eyes, looking for erasure, and then let me know what you find.
Okay, thank you, Nora. Okay, I'm going to talk briefly about the various articles in the various chapters in this book and what we discovered as we were collecting it and putting it together. Before I talk specifically about the chapters, I do want to mention a couple of other things. One is that as we were creating this book in 2023 and 2024, obviously, one of our goals was to include as many Palestinian voices as possible. But of course, during that period, a great many Palestinians were very busy just trying to stay alive. And most other Palestinians were stretched thin, trying to help their friends and their relatives in Gaza and the West Bank, and also to raise awareness elsewhere. And so often it was a bit embarrassing to approach them to also write an article. So as a result of that, not entirely, but to some extent, we have relied on reprinting some excellent articles from earlier, and we're very grateful to the authors and the publishers and also photographers for letting us include these in the book. And there are detailed acknowledgments in the chat if you wish to look at them. I would also like to mention the foreword, which is written by Emily Dobrinsky, a former president of the American Library Association. And she talks about how, as president, she was on the one hand, she had this mandate to combat censorship as president of the American Library Association. On the other hand, she felt pressured to censor herself and to not mention anything about Palestine or her positions on Palestine. And she also talks about how that experience led her to become much more involved in trying to combat this phenomenon, if you want, of liberal except for Palestine, of people who are very forward-thinking and liberal and inclusive in most of their positions, but then make an exception for Palestine. So I'd like to thank her for that. And I'd also like to thank Tzila Bar for the very beautiful and evocative cover. So part one, Libraries in Palestine, Resisting Erasure, obviously talks about libraries in Palestine and the very rich and really historic history of libraries in Palestine. I mean, most people do not realize what a deep culture of literacy and scholarship there is in the Palestinian areas. In fact, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip have some of the highest literacy rates in the world, despite the enormous obstacles that people there face to education. So we read here about that background. We learn about it. We also learn about the really persistent Israeli policy going right back to 1948 and coming forward of systematically trying to destroy libraries, confiscate not only books, but also perhaps especially archival materials that provide the evidence of the long connection of Palestinians to the land and their intellectual and cultural activities. So obviously this is a way of controlling the narrative, a way of erasing basically the the history of Palestinian existence and culture and on the land. We also learn about how that affects Palestinians and how they are resisting that policy, constantly trying to retrieve, to restore, to collect, now also to digitize materials about their heritage, and also how they just relentlessly continue to rebuild their libraries, to rebuild their collections. And in part two, now we move to thinking about how Palestine is represented in libraries in the United States. So here we find out, first of all, that there is a systematic and longstanding censorship of information about Palestine, Palestinian viewpoints, Palestinian voices in the United States. How that works, including some very scurrilous and false accusations of anti-Semitism. And we also look at what I would call the ripple effects of this censorship. And I think everybody on this call will probably agree libraries are important and, censorship is bad. But we hear about how it affects everybody who's involved, librarians, authors who have been invited to speak, and then they have been told that they can't speak, and so on, and the various efforts of librarians and other people to resist this trend. I will also mention that very sadly, we had a chapter withdrawn at the last minute. It was written by members of an organization that has done and is doing a lot of work to make Palestinians more visible in children's books and children's libraries. And they decided very shortly before publication that it was just too risky. They were frightened about the impact that publication might have on their volunteers, their physical safety, their reputations, their livelihoods, and they withdrew the chapter. So that was very, very sad. Oh, I don't want to do that yet. We're not done. Let me just stop sharing this because we don't need those anymore. And I do want to talk a little bit about why this book is so important before we move on to our panelists. I'll be very brief, but I talked briefly about the ripple effects of censorship. And it really stretches from libraries outwards. So you think of librarians who are basically caught between their ethical obligation to be inclusive and to present unbiased information, and the pressures that they come into, that they experience to not include books by Palestinians, to not highlight Palestinian books, to not purchase them, and so on and so forth. And really, sometimes they often feel threatened and unsafe in their libraries. They feel they might affect their careers. They might lose their jobs, and sometimes they don't even feel safe in their homes because they've been doxxed. So that's obviously of great a concern to librarians. Then also think about the patrons. First of all, Palestinian American patrons of libraries. Libraries are not only places where you get books, they also serve as community centers. And you find Palestinian adults who are often made to feel unsafe in their homes, unsafe in the library, unwelcome in the library, which obviously is very bad. But in particular, I'd like to talk about children, because you have these Palestinian American children, and I mean, I know this myself. There is nothing in the library that speaks to their heritage, that speaks to their particular experience. They cannot find themselves reflected in books. And that is a very, even a cruel and unfortunate effect. And beyond that, the other patrons of the library who can't find complete and unbiased information about a very important issue, which is especially important in the United States because we need to be informed about this. We have a government that supports Israel unquestioningly and has been providing weapons for the ongoing genocide and diplomatic cover. So we need that information, and we're not getting it. And then beyond that, of course, all of this enables the dehumanization of Palestinians, that policy of erasing them as a national entity, erasing their connection to the land, erasing their history, erasing their culture, and so on. And that sort of dehumanization and erasure enables sort of the genocide that we are seeing and the horrible policies in the West Bank and in Gaza. So I want to move on here and allow our panelists to talk about their contributions. So, I will mention there's a great list of resources at the end of the book as well, useful resources and links and so on. So, let me turn this over now first to Maggie, and what I'd ask you all to do is to just introduce yourselves and then talk about your subject, and then we'll just pass it over to the next person. And I will also mention, if people are thinking of questions for the Q&A, please try to put it in the Q&A section, the Q&A feature in Zoom, but you can also put it in chat and we'll retrieve it. Okay, Maggie, go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. So I'm Maggie Schreiner, and I am a member of the Steering Committee of Librarians and Archivists with Palestine, also known as LAP. So LAP was founded in 2013 as a network of self-defined librarians, archivists, and information workers in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle for self-determination. And over the past now decade plus, we have hosted 2 delegations to Palestine of library workers, created an exhibition in a box documenting our trips, organized a One Book Many Communities reading campaign, which has seen over 125 reading groups worldwide reading Palestinian literature, fundraised for libraries and archives in Palestine while sharing information about access to information restrictions, and most recently tracked instances of censorship of Palestine in libraries and archives. And I'll share more about that initiative in the chat. The chapter in this volume is a reprint of a report that we published in early 2024 about Israeli damage to libraries and archives in Gaza in the first months of the genocide, so covering October 2023 through January 2024. And this report was written by LAP volunteers, and it includes the name and location of institutions that were damaged or destroyed, a description of the collections, an estimation of the extent of destruction, as well as media citations about each instance of damage. And this research was motivated by LAP's understanding of libraries and archives as essential civic infrastructure for governance, education, cultural heritage, and more. And that the targeting of libraries and archives during the genocide in Gaza was part of a longer history of Israeli targeting of Palestinian cultural heritage throughout the occupation. And we also wanted to document this destruction in such a way that it would facilitate reporting by English language media. So the report includes information about a wide range of institutions, from government archives like the Central Archives of Gaza City to local museum collections, university libraries, community libraries, children's libraries. We also attempted to identify, again, just over the first few months of the genocide, Palestinian information workers who had been killed. And this was in recognition that cultural heritage is not just buildings and collections, but also the people who steward these collections and who also, as library and information workers ourselves, are our colleagues. So in terms of impact, since it was first published, the report has been translated into Arabic, French, Spanish, other languages. It's been adapted into zine format videos, protest signs, and has really helped sort of include cultural heritage and libraries and archives within the conversation about the destruction of civil infrastructure in Gaza. And so I want to just close by noting that the report, again, is just a small snapshot of damage that occurred in the first few months of the genocide and excludes categories like people's personal libraries in Gaza, elementary, secondary school libraries, architectural or archaeological heritage. And since our report was published in 2024, a variety of institutions are continuing to track damage to libraries and archives, including grassroots orgs like Academic Solidarity with Palestine, and also larger staffed organizations like UNESCO and PEN America. And then finally, as we move into the spring, that there are increasingly initiatives in Gaza to start rebuilding some of the archives and libraries that have been damaged. So I'll close there.
Next, thank you, Maggie. Next up is Olivia.
Hello, and thank you so much to everyone. My name's Olivia, and I'm a journalist, and I focus on culture, books, and very often the Middle East. So my chapter focuses on the theft of the library and archives of the Palestine Research Center in Beirut in 1982. I had written an article back in 2013 when a documentary came out, excuse me, called The Great Book Robbery, which brought to light a story that not many people know about. The National Library in Jerusalem houses about 6,000 books in Arabic, marked AP for abandoned property, but these books once belonged to Palestinians who fled the country or who were forced out of their homes in 1948 during the Nakba. That year, the staff of the National Library followed Jewish soldiers who collected 30,000 books in Jerusalem alone, and a total of 70,000 books from private Palestinian libraries around the country. And this information is from Israeli documents that pertain to the 1948 war. The documentary was based on an article by an Israeli PhD student, Gish Amit, who had stumbled upon these books in the National Library. So when Nora and Mary asked me to participate in the anthology, we decided that a chapter about the theft of archives and books by Israel would be important. And one of the biggest thefts happened in 1982 during the Israeli invasion of Beirut, where the Palestine Research Center was based. It was an extraordinary research center. It was very scholarly with the aim of documenting the lives of Palestinians in Palestine and the diaspora, as well as the resistance movement. It also conducted research on Zionism and Israel's position towards Palestinians. The center published pamphlets, books, and periodicals, and its historical archive preserved valuable Palestinian artifacts, such as evidence of land ownership, photographs, maps, and correspondence. In other words, it documented Palestinian history. And I'd like to point out here that Israel has always had a policy of destroying cultural and educational institutions or stealing archives in order to erase history. We saw this most recently in Gaza, as my colleague Maggie just mentioned, with the destruction of printing and publishing houses, libraries, schools, universities, or historical sites. So in 1982, when Israel invaded Beirut, they specifically sought out cultural and educational institutions and plundered archives, whether they were films or, in this case, books and paper archives. For my research, I was actually able to interview the last director of the Palestine Research Center, Sabri Giries, who is now in his 80s. And I also spoke to the current director, who's based in Ramallah at the new research center. It was important for me to speak to Palestinian sources because most of the research on these archival thefts has been carried out by Israeli and US academics, as they only have access to libraries and archives in Israel, where most of these stolen documents are. The Palestine Research Center has one particularity, though. The contents of the library that were stolen were actually returned, having first been digitized by the Israelis, but as part of a prisoner exchange with Israel. So it's perhaps the only known prisoner exchange for books. And these contents were exchanged in Algeria and remained in crates in the Embassy of Palestine in Algeria for decades as the Palestine Research Center reopened in various locations. And but just last year, after 42 years, 117 crates containing most of the original library were sent to Jordan and are now being digitized. So the question is, will they be able to be returned to what is now the fourth home of the Palestine Research Center in Ramallah, now that the situation is worse than ever? Who knows? And I think I'll end there, and hopefully you'll read the rest of the information in the chapter. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Olivia. Hannah?
Hi, thank you. My name is Hannah, and you can read my bio in the chat, which I'm sure will show up there in a moment. So my chapter focuses on one specific story that illuminates larger issues of the complicity of liberal U.S. institutions in the ongoing genocide in Gaza. So in the fall of 2023, I was working as a librarian at Germantown Friends School in Philadelphia. This is a Quaker school with core principles that include, among others, peace, integrity, and equity. It's a school like many private schools in which parent entitlement is strong, and the school at times compromises its values in order to appease people with the loudest voices. We can think about it in terms of donors, in terms of trying to avoid negative publicity, and I think this applies to many institutions, some of which you may be part of. So what happened at GFS? In late October 2023, we were supposed to host nationally renowned local children's book author Jamila Tompkins Bigelow. She is a Black Muslim woman who writes beautiful picture books. She's not Palestinian. Her books are not about Palestine. They mostly feature Black Muslim children going about their lives. Sometimes they're about their identities. Sometimes that's not the main focus. They're books that before October 7th, GFS was thrilled to celebrate. In October 2023, Jamila liked and shared a couple posts on social media affirming that Palestinian children have the right not to be bombed, the right to live. This led to some complaints from parents, and in response, the administration of the school postponed Jamila's visit, claiming that it was for her own protection. They told us librarians that we were not allowed to communicate directly with Jamila about it, or to say anything to the teachers or students who had been preparing for the visit for weeks. They crafted a short schedule change announcement that made it seem like Jamila could have canceled on us and it was about the calendar and nothing else. The school kept pushing back the visit month after month until early spring when they officially canceled it. After I left my job at the end of that school year, Jamila and I connected, and our chapter is a conversation between the two of us about what happened and the issues it brings up. I'll mention a few of them now from my perspective, and if you want to hear more from Jamila's perspective, she'll actually be at the book launch next week on April 2nd. So first, I mentioned that part of the excuse for canceling Jamila's visit was that it was for her protection. A couple years earlier, we actually had a similar issue with a trans writer. At the last minute, the administration told us he can come, but he can't talk to the younger kids, even though that's who most of his books are written for. They said, what if a kid says something transphobic? It's for his own protection. As Jamila says in our chapter, taking away work from her, making it impossible for her to read to children, does not feel like protection. It feels like protection of the status quo, protection of bigotry, not protection of the author. This author cancellation was one of many terrible decisions made that year, and the school administration always claimed to be centering students or even protecting students. This is often said when books are banned, right? Censorship as protection. They basically said, I feel a little nervous about something, so I'm going to project that on the entire community and say that kids can't handle it. This shows a profound lack of trust in children and in the community. In my experience, kids can handle things better than grown-ups most of the time. It's true around Palestine. It's certainly true around gender identity. Finally, I want to address some of what came up for me specifically regarding the role of librarians. So Jamila's case of being invited to GFS and then disinvited can be documented. But what about self-censorship? We have no way of knowing how many librarians take a look at potential authors to invite or books to buy, feature on a display, or read aloud and say, you know what, I'm going to choose the safer option. And I understand this. If you're looking at two different authors and both are legitimately excellent authors, one of them might ruffle some feathers in the community while the other would be fully embraced, you might choose the easier route. But I want us as librarians to think about this, to think about what happens when these decisions get compounded 100-fold. Who is affected? It harms the authors, it harms the children or the public or whoever your audience is, who are being exposed to certain people or experiences and denied others. So I'll stop there for now. I did write a whole zine about my experience at GFS and why I ended up leaving. Happy to talk about that more, and I think it's in the chat as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Hiba, you want to go ahead?
Hi, all. My name is Hiba. I'm a PhD student at Carleton University in Canada. And while we all love libraries and archives and museums, but it's hard to look away from criticizing them. And they have been widely criticized for being colonial technologies of collecting, gatekeeping, and interpreting cultures. And under this umbrella, we can certainly still point at institutions that remain functioning under colonial ideologies in Palestine, such as the Palestinian Archaeological Museum in Jerusalem, currently known as the Rockefeller Museum. It's an institution that was established during the Ottoman rulership in Palestine and today is managed by the Israeli occupation. Nevertheless, we still have Palestinian-led archives and museums that play a crucial role in countering the Zionist erasure of Palestinian history and culture through curating collections and organizing public programs. And as a proof of their importance, they are systematically and constantly targeted by the IOF. For instance, in 2023, the collection of Qasr al-Basha Museum in Gaza was looted by the Israeli military, and the historic building that was built during the Mamluk period was bombed. Thus, I always go back to the question is that how can we sustain these institutions as part of the decolonization project? From my observation in the field of cultural production, financial power is only a fracture of the sustainability equation. And many institutions, such as museums, archives, and libraries, struggle to sustain their visitorship rates despite the abundant funds. On the other hand, crowds continue to attend community-based spaces, such as cultural associations, and participate with exuberance in interactive arts, performances, and craftsmanship fairs. Thus, I argue that the audience retraction from these institutionalized spaces of culture is a result of mobilizing Eurocentric ontologies, overlooking local cultural practices and knowledges, and marginalizing the everyday Palestinians from cultural discourses. Furthermore, in my cultural practice across Dabke dance and exhibition design, I have witnessed how emancipatory and participatory processes can serve as a methodology for countering hegemony and erasure. There's much to learn about cultural resistance from the Palestinian folkloric initiatives such as En'ash al-Usra Association and the Popular Arts Center in the city of El Bire. For over 40 years, these associations remained public, approachable, and useful for the local community, all while functioning outside the mainstream foreign funding systems and the NGO. So libraries in Palestine and abroad can certainly benefit from these local models, and librarians and cultural workers should continue to believe that there is a way to change the hierarchies of representation and dissemination within their institutions. In theory, it entails the convergence between appropriating institutional resources and mobilizing critical theory. But this book provides many other cases and stories that show how that looks like in practice. And I'm very happy and excited that it's finally available for everyone to get the chance to read.
That's amazing. Mary, are we going to Q&A now? Is that our next thing? You're muted. You're still muted.
Oh, there it goes. Okay, sorry about that. I thought I had unmuted. Yeah, we're going to move forward now into the Q&A. So Nora, that turns this over to you. And also let me apologize. There were some links I should have posted while Nora was talking, and I will post those now.
No problem. I co-edited this book, and yet still hearing you four contributors talk about your chapters really touches me deeply. So I thank you for speaking today, but also for the work you did on your chapters. I think as a collection, they're a fascinating and hopefully new and useful insight for librarians. I'm going to pose questions, and anyone else who wants to put questions, you can in the Q&A. We probably won't have time for a question for everyone, but let me start with Maggie. Maggie, you and Librarians and Archivists with Palestine, which play such an important role, documented destruction. What are your reflections on the role of an information worker in a situation like Gaza, where destruction is not only widespread, but happens over and over again? Like libraries that were destroyed in 2014, that were rebuilt and then destroyed again in 2021, and then rebuilt and then destroyed again in 2024. If you could just talk about that reality a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's something, that I didn't mention in my remarks, that many of the institutions that have been destroyed in the last 2.5 years had already experienced destruction in previous rounds of Israeli bombing of Gaza. So obviously the role of information workers in that context, the work is cyclical and the work is challenging in a way that's very different than here. And added to that are all the restrictions around, bringing in books and even paper to Gaza. So the challenges in terms of like maintaining a library are compounded in Gaza. And then also when we think about the destruction of archives, we both lose like a broader understanding of the cultural heritage of the region and the history of the region. But also in the destruction of archives is like really records that are essential for the governance of Gaza. So birth records, land records, all of these are really essential for actually like society to just function and rebuild.
That is so true and so important. I just know from my friends from Gaza how difficult it is for them when they don't have, for example, their graduation certificates and they want to go to school and they don't have any documentation of that. Really tough. Thank you. Thank you. Hannah, let me pose a question to you, follow up. You no longer work in the position that you had when the author visit with Jamila was canceled, but you still organize with librarians and archivists with Palestine. Can you share a little bit about the difference between opposing censorship as a staff member inside of an organization versus the work that you do outside of an organization?
Yeah, thanks. I think it can be a really hard position when you're inside, especially when your job depends upon it. But I do think there are many tools that we have as librarians that can be used from within. I mean, first of all, it's important to have a strong collection development policy and book challenge procedures. So there's something to stand on when people are being jerks. There's also things like Read Palestine Week in November that Publishers for Palestine does, and the One Book Mini Communities campaign that librarians and archivists with Palestine run. This year, that will be in the fall. So those are places where you can connect to a larger community that can potentially legitimize your choices. And if those wouldn't fly in your institution, there are also heritage months. So I've definitely put Palestinian literature on Arab American Heritage Month displays in April. And for the detractors, even there, the good thing is that May is Jewish American Heritage Month. And there are actually a lot of great books by Jewish authors that are not Zionist and that have nothing at all to do with Israel or Palestine. I was specifically in like the children's and YA field, and that's where I was like very intentionally putting out things. So it's easy to honor every Heritage Month, including Arab American Heritage Month and including Palestinian literature there. I think also just a focus on mirrors and windows, just that importance of children or adults having access to literature that both reflects their own experiences and that opens up a window into someone else's world. It's a widely embraced concept in librarianship and in education, and I think it's something we can fall back on to insist on truly diverse voices, including Palestinians and people who support Palestine. And final note, if you do experience censorship in your institution, do use that. I don't know if the censorship tracker, has it shown up in here? Yeah, in the chat. The Librarians and Archivists with Palestine is tracking censorship and reporting back on that in many different ways. And so if you have anything to share there, definitely can.
Thank you so much for that. I want to mention that the event at the Los Angeles Public Library with Jinan Matari and I that was censored illegally and, in contradiction to all librarian standards and ethics, was for Read Palestine Week. And Read Palestine Week was established in order to create space for Palestinians who are generally censored. So, yeah, it's just all crazy. So thank you for mentioning Read Palestine Week. I have a question for Heba, which is, you talked about museums and libraries in Palestine as colonial institutions. That's kind of a perspective I don't think we hear a lot here about. And I know, because I've read your chapter and I know you, that some of that is through the funding for those institutions coming from foreign governments or foreign donors that have their own political agendas. I'm interested in knowing from you, if a librarian is working in an institution that is colonized or colonial, how does a librarian try to decolonize the library that they work in?
Yeah, I'm always thinking about this, and I always feel like this is the trap question that I can't find answer to. I'm not sure if this is really possible in practice, but like in theory, we read a lot about how we can mobilize resources and tools and technologies and ideologies towards the decolonial project. And we need to keep feeding in our practice and like inform the global theory in that. So I just think that this only entails the constant iteration between our practices and what the critical theory is saying in that sense. And like one thing that I'm imagining now could be mostly useful is participation and bringing people in these spaces and allowing communities and local practitioners and bearers of knowledges to use these spaces and be part of the co-production processes inside institutions. Hopefully, the countering of the erasure of one group could inform the resistance of erasing the other.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah, I
so
just
much.
want to mention we're at about 3 minutes out.
Yeah, I think, although I didn't ask Olivia a question, I'm going to pose the question and then you don't have time to answer it, Olivia, but it will interest people in your chapter. And then Mary, I know you have a few closing thoughts and we want to end on time and respect people. Olivia's chapter is so crazy and almost like tragically comical, right? These archives were expelled along with Palestinians, and then they were displaced along with Palestinians, and then they were dispersed along with Palestinians, and then they were destroyed along with Palestinians. And now there is an effort to regather that information, to keep it from being erased and available to people because it is Palestinian history. And I just want to acknowledge how much I love the fact that this archive was returned in a prisoner exchange, and the acknowledgement of the books and the papers and the documents and the history as having been imprisoned by Israel as part of their, occupation, of Palestine. So I think that's fascinating, and I hope everyone reads your chapter and all the chapters. Mary, do you want to close us out?
We've had, 4 great panelists talking about their chapters today, but there's a second launch event on April 2nd. Again, at noontime, we're going to have 4 other panelists. So please, consider sharing that with friends who might have missed this, or even attending that as well, because you'll hear from different people. And I want to thank everybody for attending.
Thank you for coming, for your interest in the book, for your interest in the topic, and for all of you, those of you who wrote chapters, and to all of the Palestinian information workers who have continued, like healthcare workers, like journalists, like teachers, like parents, to resist the effort to be erased and to stay alive so that we can all benefit from the richness of Palestinian people and culture.
Okay. Thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.